Hello, everybody. We are here to discuss today cybersecurity with the most important mobile operator in Africa. If you can explain to our reader the company, where you're working on, and your role.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Justin Williams. I'm the Group Executive for Security for MTN Group. MTN Group is a mobile operator operating primarily across Africa. We have almost 300 million customers on our mobile network. We also provide digital and fintech services. I think our fintech services, we have close to 70 million customers using that platform, so that does place us effectively as being one of the largest banks in Africa. As an organization, we really look to enable customers to access digital services, to be able to do things that they may never have been able to do otherwise. So we really believe that everyone deserves the benefits of a modern connected life.
Yeah, I think that digital today is going to change the life of everybody. Your point of view, that luckily, we are interviewing a person that is outside Europe, because, in Europe today, we were talking before, we are just talking about NIS2, DORA. So what are, from your point of view, the main challenge in cybersecurity for a group that is big like you described today?
Yeah, we've got a lot of different challenges. You kind of mentioned all these regulations that the EU has. We in Africa don't have the privilege of having a single Africa, although often it's seen as being, a single country. It's not a single country. It's a continent that has lots of different countries, and each country has its own regulators and legislators. And unfortunately, the African Union is not strong enough to ensure harmonization of the legislation and regulation across the continent. So for each and every country where we operate, we have a different set of rules of operation, which makes things interesting, at least. And across Africa, we also have a lot of geopolitical instability. We've seen a lot of geopolitical instability globally with Russia and Ukraine, which has been impacting on Europe. But if one looks across Africa, we've also had a whole lot of coups and political instability happening, where one has had, it used to be Wagner Group, supported by Russia, with a whole lot of coups and governments supported by the mercenaries. And so you get a lot of hacktivism type activity happening as a result of this political activity. So what we see is that the activists get upset with a particular government, whether it's in Sudan or Kenya or Nigeria. And as a result, they initiate a lot of attacks against a particular country. And because there's a telco, we provide critical national infrastructure in a particular country, we then get caught in the crossfire. And so the attackers are just trying to cause some noise, so then we become a target of the attack. So we've seen a lot of attacks happening across our West African and kind of Central African countries in the earlier part of the year. Things have calmed down a little bit now, thank goodness, but we keep monitoring that quite closely. So, we have a fledgling threat intelligence team, and it's something that they are constantly looking out to see what are the different activist groups saying, what's the chatter across various Telegram and other social media platforms, and just keep aware and alert constantly as to what might be happening and what might be the next attack against the organization.
Yeah, just now switch on my curiosity, and so with regard, with the geopolitical situation, because of course you are describing the situation in the big country that is Africa. There is also geopolitical issue now across the world, and so I think that resilience and continuity is one of the issue. How DDoS affect, for example, your infrastructure, and how intelligence at the point is important in your cybersecurity let me say, structure?
So certainly DDoS is a major issue. I mean, fortunately, the way MTN is structured, we have one of our subsidiaries that looks after all of the interconnect for our different opcos and looks at leasing the undersea connectivity and provides the global internet connectivity. So we have a centralized DDoS protection platform that our Baobab business run, so that we can make sure that we protect all of the operating companies appropriately. You know, if one goes back into 2015, 2016, there was a lot of attacks happening, particularly in Liberia. And you know, at the time it was reported as the entire country of Liberia being under attack, and the internet went down and had a huge impact on the individuals in that country. And it turned out later that it was actually somebody working on behalf of management of a competitor who was paying an attacker to actually attack us as an organization. But the net effect of all of that was we completely redesigned the DDoS protection capability to put in a multi-tiered approach that has localized capability, centralized capability, and then cloud capability on top of that. And so that's gone a long way towards addressing attacks. But if one looks at the global scale of attacks and how they continue to grow, one never wants to kind of come out and say that, yes, we protect it. We're constantly working on this and improving what we're doing, and then using the threat intelligence to try and get any advance notice that we can of any particular attack, so we can put people on high alert, and that they can then dynamically adjust activities, they can monitor services, and keep customers informed if there's any kind of impact and the like happening. So certainly that's been something that we've paid a lot of attention to in the earlier part of this year.
And, you know, yes, every time you talk, it's very interesting. So I'm curious at the point to understand, in your cybersecurity, let me say, strategy, cloud, on-prem, so what is your strategy in your company?
So as an organization, we are adopting a hybrid strategy. So you know, we were largely on-prem to start with. Connectivity in parts of Africa, so some of our opcos, can be a challenge at times. So you know, they've even been moving from having centralized services sitting in one country to actually moving some of those services in country. So in the event of an undersea cable cut or something like that, that your financial services can continue to operate and the like. But nonetheless, as an organization, we recognize that there's merit in cloud. So we have a very measured strategy around cloud migration. We have signed a kind of global partnership deal with Microsoft as a provider. And so initially we are moving services based on a business case into cloud. And so two of our largest operations have started with that. And we will continue that process into some of the small operations, business case dependent, while we continue to evaluate a second cloud operator to see if there's benefits in doing such. So definitely a very careful, considered, measured approach to make sure that we don't cause more damage or incur more cost than the benefit that gets obtained out of it.
And in your opinion, in your cybersecurity strategy, cloud is helping you in order to increase your posture? So what is your opinion about the cloud?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. So if I look at cloud, we've got that part of cloud which is happening under the ambit of this strategy and the careful migration part with Microsoft. And then we've got pieces of cloud which have maybe happened outside of that ambit. And what we're seeing is that where it's happening in the controlled, considered manner, we're seeing an increase in posture. But where it's happening outside of that ambit, then it's going the other way. And the posture is actually a little bit lower than some of the on-prem stuff. So we're trying very hard to enforce governance and to eliminate all of this, I want to call it almost unsanctioned cloud environment, and push that back into the fully managed, monitored environment. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. Cloud makes things far too easy for people to go and deploy things, and they can do it in breach of governance.
Okay, interesting, very interesting. Well, I have to ask you, you are working also in the mobile domain. So what are the big challenge with mobile with regard to cybersecurity? So what are your biggest challenge now?
So particularly on the mobile side, you know, we have lots of legacy technologies. So as much as we talk about 5G standalone, what's coming with 6G, the reality is that we still have 2G and 3G widely deployed, and it's going to be quite difficult to shut that down anytime soon. So we keep on adding the newer, better technologies in, but we can't get rid of the old. So the scope of what you need to protect is constantly increasing. If we look at it from a consumer point of view, we're probably sitting at about 50% of our customers are still using a feature phone, so they're not using a smartphone. So when it comes time to then say, okay, we want to start pushing customers to use an app or to use a payment app or banking app, we also then run into challenges because consumers cannot afford to replace their phone every 2 years. And even if they do replace the phone, they hand it down to a family member. And that will happen multiple generations. So you can end up with devices that are 6 to 8 years old still being around on the network. So the fact that Google is no longer patching that version of Android, that doesn't matter to our customer. They've got a mobile device that works. That particular customer can't afford to replace it, so they will keep using it until it literally dies. And even then, they will go to markets to get it fixed, to get replacement parts, and keep the device running as long as actually possible. So you've got a long tail of obsolete equipment and devices that one needs to keep supporting and securing against. So it's not as simple as being able to say, okay, you know what, we're only going to support this new generation technology, we turn everything else off. You will eliminate huge portions of your customer base. So you're constantly doing these risk assessments of going, okay, from a pure security perspective, we don't like what's happening. But if we issue a directive that says you have to turn it off, then the customer can't transact, which is the better outcome. So constantly having to make these trade-offs.
So let's say, last question that normally, we are talking about AI, future challenge, is a classical to end up interview talking about AI today. But, if you have to look now to now, and let me say, imagine you in a future of 5 years, 10 years, so, what is your, let me say, the big threat? What you are afraid of? What? So what? Let me say, what can be at that point something that you have to pay attention if you're looking in the future in the company where you are. So what is the biggest threat in your mind, or the biggest challenge? Imagine the future, of course.
I think quite often, the challenge and the threat are two sides of the same coin. So, you mentioned AI earlier, for example, and I think the pace at which AI and generative AI in particular has been growing kind of over the last 2 years has been absolutely astounding. I think if we look at the capability of the first kind of ChatGPT and LLMs 2 years ago, and we look at what they can do now, you can't even begin to compare those. And when you look at it as being, let's say, small language models that can operate on a local device have more capability now than large language models had 2 years ago. You've just got to ask yourself, where does this go in the next 3 to 5 years? And the kind of the costs and the barriers to entry around that have significantly declined. And we're seeing that it's very easy to remove guardrails out of many of these. So if one goes onto Hugging Face and looks to see, okay, I want a version of any particular open source model, and I want to have the uncensored version of that, you just type it into the search bar, you download it to your local machine, and then instead of getting that answer saying, no, you can't do this, it happily says, here's your phishing mail, or here's the bad code, or whatever it might be. So the reality is that the guardrails are preventing the good guys from doing anything accidentally bad, but is doing absolutely nothing to prevent the bad guys from using this technology to enhance the attacks against the organization. So then we need to be looking very carefully at how do we use the same technology then to enable our team members to perform at a more optimal level to be able to defend better. So the kinds of thinking are, sure, you can't put every email through an LLM. That's never going to work. But you could potentially put some samples of bad mails through and say, help me write the defensive rule that's going to block these in the future, and then use the LLM to write the rule that then can block things in the future. So we're going to have to find really smart ways of working to enable our teams to do more. I think we struggle from a resource perspective, and teams struggle with burnout. So we've got to find smarter ways of doing things.
Good. So, let me say, it was really a pleasure to have the interview, and I'm really happy that because you touched several things very interesting, and I think that our reader have a very nice view and of what is cybersecurity from your point of view, but especially I think they really appreciate all the suggestions that you talk about in this interview. So thank you very much for the opportunity to have an interview with you, and talk to you soon.
Thank you.